Greetings from Ann Yu. Yes, that's my name. My story's called My Eyes See the Date of Death, and you might think it's a lie or a fiction, but I'll tell you real stories that happened to me last year. This was after I recovered from the COVID virus. Like many, starting from 2019, this disease affected almost every household. My family was no exception. Rich and poor alike were dying, but the wealthy had a better chance of survival. My family itself is very poor. My father is a compulsive gambler, and my mother loves to drink. So my little brother and I were basically on our own. During the peak of the pandemic, my mother was the first to die right there in the hospital bed. Due to years of alcohol addiction, her liver suddenly failed. We couldn't even bury her. Of course, this was a huge blow to my brother and I, and my father was shattered because he was deprived of the chance to go out and play poker, as he'd done before. But he found a way out. He started catching free Wi-Fi from the nearest cafe and playing online from home. I had to look for a job because there was no one else to support our needs and my father's expenses. So I signed up as a volunteer to help doctors receive patients, clean rooms, and bring necessary medicine. We had to act quickly and efficiently. In my protective suit, there was no air to breathe. My body was sweating so much that my clothes got wet within a couple of hours, and I had to constantly run around. Unable to bear it, I took off my mask halfway through to breathe some air, and that was a terrible mistake. Next to me, a patient who was suffering from a severe form of the disease was transported into a wheelchair, and he sneezed right next to me. His saliva got onto my hands, and I automatically covered my nose and mouth with them. After a day, my temperature rose to 39.5 degrees. Then all the symptoms appeared, and I was hospitalized in the same regional hospital where I worked. After about 3 days, I started to feel better, although my consciousness was in a fog. I still remember the neighbor in my ward. She was an older woman who called herself a witch and said that she possessed a certain gift. That was the ability to predict the future. I'm not particularly superstitious, but she insisted that part of her would merge with me at the moment of her death. Supposedly, she chose me because my body was stronger than many others in the building. So when she asked for my hand for a ritual, I got up from my bed and walked over to her. At that moment, she started convulsing and muttering something in an unknown language, and then it seems I passed out. When I woke up, that old woman was no longer alive, and I was left with only memories. I saw her older sister who came to say goodbye. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "My sister did not make a mistake in her choice. Use the gift for good, and you," she said. And then she left. How did she know my name? I thought to myself, who even let her in here? This is a red zone, and she came into the room without a protective suit or a mask. I asked the nurse, "How did you let that old woman in here without a suit?" The nurse looked around and said that no one came in. That's when my heart started racing. Above the doctor's head, I saw strange numbers. It read 48 hours and 7 minutes, and the time was getting shorter with each passing moment. "What kind of device is that on your head?" The doctor looked in the mirror and said, "Nothing, I'm just in my suit. Why?" "Don't you see those numbers?" "No." "Perhaps you're still weak. Drink some water and soon I'll bring you some medicine." 2 days later, she died from a hemorrhage stroke. I was in shock. The numbers above the heads of each patient and staff member every day appeared, but I couldn't see mine. When I was discharged, I came home and immediately looked at my father. He had 40 more years ahead of him. But my brother? He only had 1, and he was only 5 years old. What? How is that possible? Only a year? What's wrong? I started going through his medical records and had him examined for diseases through acquaintances. "He has colorectal cancer," the oncologist told me. It sounded like a death sentence. How was that possible? He was too young for this diagnosis. But then I remembered that we never ate well. Our parents never fed us properly. We ate whatever we found, sometimes even eating something spoiled because we were so young and didn't understand not to. Due to our terrible nutrition, my little brother developed colon cancer. But fortunately, we caught it early before any symptoms appeared. I was so angry. Why does our wayward father get such a long life, while my brother only gets 1 year? I didn't tell my younger brother the truth. I only said he needed serious treatment for gastritis. He didn't ask any questions, so I just said what I said. I continued with my volunteer work, but now I saw through every person. And then I learned to use my unexpected acquired gift well. Doctor, his heart's about to stop. Here's the defibrillator! Give him adrenaline! I shouted to the entire ward. 10 seconds later, the machine showed no heartbeat. However, we managed to save the patient. First 1, then 3, then 5 patients. Our chief doctor, Hyun Shik, took me aside to talk. How do you know what will happen to each patient so well? I just read their medical history quickly and think ahead, monitoring the indicators. That's all? So simple? I'm sorry, but as a doctor with 10 years of experience, I don't believe that. You talk about cardiac arrest before the device even shows it. How is that possible? I don't even understand it myself. Maybe it's a premonition? I didn't want to tell anyone about my gift so people wouldn't think I was crazy, but my fame started to spread. My boss, Hyun Shik, looked at me with suspicion. Then in the middle of the night, an ambulance arrived at the hospital when I was already about to go home. It was so strange. The vital signs were absent, and the doctors had already given up, but I saw that he had 18 more years to live. He was an older man, but everything looked so strange. Time of death, 11:34 p.m. No! What? He's still alive! What? What nonsense are you talking? This man died a minute ago. No, he's alive! What's wrong with him? What's the diagnosis? You're just a volunteer, and you please don't overstep your boundaries. Treating people is a doctor's job! I pushed the doctor aside, felt for the patient's weak pulse with my hands. There's a pulse, but it's slow. What's wrong with him? Dr. Shik remained silent and glared at me. The nurse answered eventually. He had complaints about his heart, and we found an empty bottle of this disopyramide at his home. The nurse handed it to me. This is an antiarrhythmic drug. He must have taken too much. Check the equipment. Something's wrong with it. Give me another machine. His hands and feet are cold. He's barely breathing, but he has a weak pulse. Did he have a previous heart attack? What are his relatives saying? Yes, they said he had one a couple of weeks ago. I think he's in cardiogenic shock. Quickly, to the operating room. Who are you to decide what to do with a patient? Don't overstep your bounds, and you. The elderly wife of the patient burst into the hospital in tears, begging us to save her husband. I looked at the doctor, and just then the nurse brought over another machine. We connected it, and the readings came to life. Hyun Shik was in complete shock. He didn't say another word, but the patient's clock was no longer ticking down. I comforted his wife, telling her that he would live for many more years. I knew that for sure, but she didn't believe me, saying I wasn't even a trained nurse. But I was right. The next day, they greeted me in the hospital with drinks and cake. It was so nice, and at the very end of the row stood Hyun Shik. He came over and handed me a cold coffee. You know how to surprise us, volunteer, he said to me, ruffling my hair. Just then, the Minister of Health walked into the hospital. We all bowed to him, as his visit was unexpected. The chief doctor of the hospital ran up, flustered, asking why he wasn't informed about the visit so they could properly receive him. But the minister turned to me immediately and showed me a viral video on his phone. In the video, I was shouting that the patient was still alive, with almost zero vital signs, and then it showed the same man sitting and eating in his room 12 hours later. I wanted to personally see the volunteer who, for some reason, is more educated than the chief physician of this hospital. It's a great honor, but I only helped with the diagnosis. Only? Do you know that the correct diagnosis is half the successful treatment? Don't be modest. Your video brought high ratings to this hospital, and I wanted to make you an offer. What offer? To study to become a medic. I recently opened a college at this hospital, and you can study for free and practice at the same time. We'll also organize a scholarship for you. I couldn't believe such a miracle, but I couldn't agree because if I was studying, I wouldn't have time to watch over and treat my brother. The minister left me his business card and asked me to consider his offer again. That evening, I ran home to share the news with my little brother. I brought a lot of delicious food, was in a great mood, but a real nightmare awaited me at home. The front door was broken, and inside there was chaos. I couldn't see my father or my brother, but I saw the police. What's happening here? Where's my brother? Where's my father? The police approached me and said that they were apparently kidnapped. They tried to calm me down by saying that there were no traces of blood, and now they were checking the video recording from the nearest cafe where my dad stole Wi-Fi. After watching it, I realized that they came for my dad. Apparently, his bets and games got him into trouble. Through the video recording, I saw that my little brother's counter remained unchanged, but it increased by 15 years from the last course of immunotherapy. And now, instead of 1, it was 20 more. And also with my dad. His counter remained the same. I can help find them. But how? I have gained 14,000 followers since yesterday. I'll find witnesses. I made a post on Instagram and TikTok. I briefly explained that my family had disappeared and I needed to find them. Within 10 minutes, I received dozens of messages, and a few of them were about their approximate location. I immediately passed on the information to the police, and then I received a call from an unknown number. It was the wife of a patient I'd saved when everyone else had already given up on him. She asked me to come to the hospital to see her husband. When I arrived, both of them fell to their knees in front of me. I was surprised and asked why they were doing that. "Sir, you can't get up. Please lie down and rest."
"I'm sorry for what I've done to you. I know where your family is."
I immediately called the investigator and told him where they were holding my father and my brother. That man whom I saved turned out to be one of those bandits. He had heart problems and didn't want to work for a boss who extorted money from online casino enthusiasts. The boss replaced his medication with ones that nearly killed him. He told me everything and asked for my forgiveness. He was supposed to kidnap my little brother and demand ransom from my father, but apparently something went wrong, and they took both of them. They learned about my situation and that the ones kidnapped were my family from social media, and immediately informed me. I thanked the patient, and within an hour, we managed to free my brother and father from captivity. Just a few minutes later, I saw the old woman's sister again, whom I'd met once before. She smiled at me and said, "You're doing everything right." Did I reveal the secret of my gifts or superpowers? Partially. My dad let slip that my mom had visions, and they scared her so much that that's why she started drinking. So maybe it's a family thing. But I decided to go to medical school after all and use my talent for good.